One issue, 2 points of view. Agora.
2 years ago, Rajendra Kuma Pachauri received the Nobel Peace Prize alongside Al Gore for his work at the head of the international group of experts on climate change. The European Commissioner in charge of development and humanitarian aid, Karel de Gucht, received him in Stockholm as part of the European Development Days initiative. The two exchanged views in the context of the upcoming international conference on climate change, planned in December in Copenhagen. What global response to climate change and development is the theme of this week's Agora?
We are 50 days away from the Copenhagen conference. When you look at conferences, problems are never solved 50 days before the conference. So I think it's important that we are not only optimistic about it, but that we are making efforts to come to a result in Copenhagen. Europe is, we are really set for doing that. And what we should do in the coming weeks is, first of all, agree amongst ourselves in the European Union on the burden sharing for the financing of the developing world. And secondly, press the other participants to come to real negotiation, because the longer we wait, the more complicated the problem will be.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there are changes that are taking place which are not always hitting the headlines. But even the US, Senator John Kerry was with us at an event that we organized on the 1st of October. He's very confident that something will happen with the passage of the bill that he's introduced in the Senate. And in the last few days, there have been some very interesting changes. But I think the US role is absolutely critical to the success of Copenhagen. And this is where Europe can also play an extremely important role diplomatically. So also Japan. Because I believe that unless you can get the US on the table, I'm afraid the chances of success would be diminished.
What is the responsibility of the developed world vis-à-vis the developing world, and especially the least developed and vulnerable countries with respect to, for example, industrial policy? Because there could be a tendency that we and that the industry are developing activities who are detrimental to climate change, especially in those countries. That's one example. Another example is deforestation. Companies, yes, from developed countries are active in this sector. So I think Europe and also the United States will have to focus on the extraterritorial impact of their legislation. I mean, what I mean is they will have to regulate their own companies' activities in those countries.
I believe it's also important to see that Africa, which is providing a substantial amount of minerals, substantial amount now of even hydrocarbon resources, gets adequate returns and is able to make the best use of those returns. And I must say that the record has not been all that great, because you look at the case of Nigeria, which has been an oil exporter for a long time. I'm not too sure whether the wealth that they've generated as a result has been used effectively. So I think we need to create capacity in these countries.
Climate change, adaptation and mitigation go hand in hand with sustainable economic growth in Africa. Because if there's no economic growth in Africa, then it will be a continuous flow of donations. And this is not a good basis to resolve a problem that is going to stay with us in any case for decades, if not hundreds of years. We need a sound basis for that.
Could I raise another issue, and that's the whole issue of lifestyle changes. Now, this is something which makes people uncomfortable, because they feel that lifestyle changes implies giving up all the good things that development has provided us so far. But it seems to me that if everybody in the world is going to emulate and follow the same styles of living that you have in the developed world,
it's not sustainable.
It's not sustainable. And Mahatma Gandhi was very right when he was asked whether He didn't want India to reach the same level of prosperity as Britain. And his response was it took Britain half the resources of the planet to reach its level of prosperity. How many planets will India require? So, you know, we have to set examples whereby the rest of the world also feels that there is a change taking place in the developed countries.
Let me give you a very interesting example. We have these peacekeeping forces in Darfur.
Right.
And what you see is that the water table went down by 8 meters in a couple of years.
Right.
Why? Because Europeans, Americans are using much more water. Now, this is a very fundamental problem, because if everybody on this planet is going to use as much water as we do,
yes,
as the Europeans do or the Americans do,
yes,
then it can never be sustainable. The same goes, for example, with air conditioning. No?
Yes.
You're freezing in the United States.
Absolutely.
And some in Europe think that they have to imitate this, and then you also start freezing in certain parts of Europe, which is...
Also in Asia. It started happening in Asia on a large scale.
Because it's not a matter of continents, it's a matter of prosperity.
Yes.
I mean, the Indians, who are as prosperous as the Europeans, and they exist.
Yes, and
they are spending, they have the same impact on climate as we have.
In fact, worse. They are much worse in some respects, because they just don't feel the social restraints that you have.
Social pressure also.
Yes. So, you know, they really go berserk in terms of their consumption patterns. And I think we really need to bring about some change in thinking in that direction also, worldwide. And this, of course, has to happen in the US.
I think it's very important to have that kind of measures to mobilize people, and without mobilizing the population, you can never get to a solution.
That's true. Psychologically, I think it's very important. And I think in that respect, Europe, again, has been ahead of everyone else. The extent of public transport you have over here. And in the United States, that's completely missing. I think by creating infrastructure, you're also bringing
public
about...
investment in general. Huh?
Exactly. You're bringing about lifestyle changes, which otherwise would not be possible. Otherwise, you go to a city like Houston, everybody uses a car because there's nothing else you can do.
And big cars.
Yeah, big, huge cars.
But they can't sell them anymore. That's the problem.
Okay. Quite right.